Russian President Putin at first explained the downing of an Ilyushin airplane as a chain of tragic accidental circumstances. But now he's come down firmly in support of his generals, who insist Israel is exclusively to blame for the incident. New jamming gear is already in Syria, and S-300 air defense batteries are on their way. Will this change the balance of power and clip Israel's wings in the skies over Syria? With me in the studio to discuss the continuing fallout is Israel Air Force Reserve Brigadier General Asaf Agmon, who spent decades as a commander, operator, and planner of special missions, and in recent years, he's been a security analyst, a very highly regarded security analyst. Asaf, welcome.
My pleasure.
It's good to have you here. All right, we've all heard the accusations, and we've seen the illustrations from Moscow that supposedly support its claim that Israel is totally responsible for this tragic affair. Why isn't Israel coming out publicly with its own recordings and maps to bolster its narrative and its version of events?
The Israeli debriefing of this tragic incident was on the tactical level, on the military level, with the military effects. The Russian debriefing is completely on a different level, on their national interest level. So this is no matchup between the two briefings. So putting this debriefing on the front stage in order to win a public opinion is a mistake, because this kind of discussion should be on the backstage, behind the curtain, and not on the front stage.
But Asaf, the behind-the-scenes, closed-door briefing by the Israel Air Force commander, Major General Norkin, obviously didn't seem to have much effect on the Russian generals.
I think that Israel had to send, as the head of the delegation, a senior political official, in my opinion, the defense minister himself, in order to discuss it with the Soviets, otherwise with the Russians. Otherwise, it's not a matchup of briefing. Right. And as you know, lately, facts is not the major factor in such discussions.
Right. It's the impression.
Yeah.
But we know that Netanyahu did want to send a senior-level political official, and Moscow declined.
So this is some challenge that Netanyahu has to face.
Yeah. Listen, let's move to the jamming, which Israel has dealt with Russian jamming in the past, during most of the Cold War, especially during its war of attrition. And although these new jamming capabilities in Syria are aimed at restricting Israeli freedom of maneuver off the Syrian coast, is this really an operational impediment, or perhaps Moscow is just sending a message to Israel that its days of basically owning the skies of Syria are over?
It's not a message, it's a big message, because it's not that the Syrians ask the Russians to send them this and this equipment.
Right.
It's the Russians' decision to send this equipment. So it's Russian prestige now in the area. And they are sending all this equipment saying, look, now we are taking care and we are taking control of this operation in this area, and we will decide what will be the rule of the games now.
Now, as an operator, weren't you surprised that Russia never had a friend or foe identification system in place from the very beginning with the Syrians?
I hardly can imagine that they didn't have.
All right. Let's move on to the S-300 and why it is considered such a big issue. Washington, the National Security Advisor, called it an escalatory, a step of escalation, and Israel obviously is not pleased with it. But what's the real problem here? There's workarounds.
It's a big red flag, because now it's Russian technology, Russian reputation, Russian prestige, and Russia, it's not Israeli Air Force versus the Syrian Air Force. It's Israel versus prestige and interest, strategic interest of Russia. And Russia will not be able to let this interest be down. Right. So even if the system will be with Russian technician or without Russian technician, it's mean if it's failed, and if Israel will be able to do whatever they done before, against Russian will, this will be a big problem for the Russians that they will not be able to overcome.
Is there any creative way, other than the apology offered publicly by the Prime Minister and this continuous expression of regret for the loss of life, is there any way for Israel to regain some of the confidence, or allow Russia to diffuse its need to satisfy its public by bashing Israel?
I think Israel government should understand that by military means only, there is no chance to stop the Iranian in Syria, exactly like it happened in Lebanon. We can slow down it, we can make problems of it, but the only way to stop it is by use of heavily and huge diplomatic efforts with the US as a leader, with the European allies as a partner, trying to find common interests with the Russians in order to stop the Iranians. Otherwise, we will not be able to stop. And they are the big winner of the last tragic incidents.
The Iranians are the big winner.
Of course.
Absolutely. Now let's get back to how to work to diffuse this crisis with the Russians. Working with the United States is probably going to involve a lot more sticks than carrots. Do you foresee any creative way that Israel may possibly use carrots to turn around Putin's need for public opinion as far as being so negative on Israel?
The main problem of Israel is Trump's new policy of America first. If America first, and America will not be in the Middle East, it's long-term, for many, many years, a basic superiority interest of the Russian to have a strategic position in the Middle East. So without joining effort with the US and cooperating with the European allies, there will be no possible to find a solution with the Russians.
Although Trump wants to have an us or them type of a strategy.
Okay, so try to find a way how we can find a joint interest in order to stop the Iranian, making Syria as a Lebanon, and in situations that even for the Russian it will be a problem.
Right, right. Now, of course, Syria has served as a testing ground, a laboratory for many of these advanced Russian capabilities that we see in operation there. Putin's not going to want to give that up, nor his strategic leadership role in this region.
Of course, it serves his interest. So he will continue to doing so. But, for example, when the U.S. is talking about building a U.S. base in Poland, for example, and we had incident like this in the past, should the U.S. will agree to give up this plan in order to convince Putin to draw back a little bit in Syria, that can be a combination. But this is kind of things that are very complicated, very difficult, but it should be pursued because this is the only way, besides military means when you have to do it, in order to find a better strategic position for Israel.
On the military deconfliction channel set up between the Israelis and the Russians, 12 minutes is an ample amount of early warning. Is there any way that they could possibly expand upon that?
I don't want to go into operational details, but this tragic incident was not necessary to happen. So and it's not because of the coordination between the Russian and the Israelis. It's because the way it was controlled and because the way the Russians know how the Syrians are operating their ground defenses, and it should not happen.
Do you think the next step to ameliorate, to calm the situation, that there should be a high-level Russian, maybe even a Russian-Israeli joint exercise to instill more confidence between?
First of all, it should be discussed in the top level between Putin, Netanyahu, and Trump together. Without it, nothing can be achieved.
Asaf Agmon, thank you so much for your insights, and we will watch this as it evolves.